All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Bria Watson. I am from UC Berkeley Law. So, thank you all so much for joining today. And thank you, Marcy, for setting this up for us. So, we are going to talk today about what it takes to get into law school, how you apply, what it's like at UC Berkeley, and then I'll leave time for questions at the end. You can use the Q&A function if you don't want to type your question, if you don't want to speak them aloud once we finish. But I will also take hand raises and things like that at the end. So feel free to log them. All right, so yep, this is the session overview. Part one, the application process. Part two, UC Berkeley itself. Part three is tuition and financial aid. There have been some changes that are happening in graduate admissions, so we'll cover that and then we'll answer your questions. So this slide that you're looking at is a breakdown of the application cycle generally. So our application opens September 1st. Most law schools also open that day, but it may vary depending on the law school. And we at Berkeley Law, we close on February 17th of the next year. So we do rolling admissions, which means you could apply in September or October, but you may not hear back from us until November or December, but our application will close. So on February 17th. So that just means that we are admitting in batches as we get completed applications to review. This slide is the binding early decision application. So this one is similar to what you may have completed or seen when you were doing undergraduate admission. So early decision means that you are essentially committing to attend to that school. So if you apply to Berkeley Law early decision and you get in, you have to withdraw all of your other applications and commit to attending. The benefit at Berkeley Law is that you know by December where you're going to be going to law school, and that helps when it comes to getting earlier on the housing list. There also is the case that we don't deny applications for early decision. So if you don't get early decision, your application will be rolled over into regular decision. So you'll be reviewed again. And then we also have a gift aid award that is guaranteed with early decision. So you get 35,000 each year for the 3 years that you'll be in law school. So if you are considering, like a specific area that you want to be in or just a certain school, and you know for sure that that's where you want to be, early decision may be something that you consider. However, the deadline for early decision is earlier, so you would have to keep that in mind. But yeah, it's the case that you can do that for some other law schools as well. Next, we have the application components. So this is also kind of similar to the undergrad process. You'll need a standardized test that can be the LSAT or the GRE, your academic record, so that's transcripts from all schools that you got college credit for, personal statement and addenda, your resume, and then also letters of recommendation. So when we're looking at your application as the admissions committee, we're thinking first, can you do the work? So we're looking at your transcript, and then we're also looking at your test score. So that's the LSAT or the GRE. And then we also consider what will you contribute to the classroom, to conversations, to the legal profession, things like that. So we're looking at your resume. We're also looking at what are you saying in your personal statement and optional statements. And then, are you someone we need and want in our community? We rely on letters of recommendation to hear what others think about you, your work ethic, your character, things like that. So for the standardized test, we accept the LSAT or the GRE. The writing sample is required for both of those tests, so just make sure when you sign up that you are including that portion. We will use your highest score, but we can see all of your previous attempts. At this point, I would say it's pretty common for most people to take the LSAT or the GRE at least more than once. I'd say commonly we're seeing 2 or 3 times, and beyond that, I've seen up to 5. So it just depends on, when you started preparing for the exam and how many times you want to take it after. Um, we will use your highest score, but if you say, maybe on the LSAT you started at a 150 and then by your third attempt you ended up at a 170. It is useful for us to see that you've kind of improved along the way. However, say you don't improve, what you can do is cancel the score that you don't want us to see, but just keep in mind that you do have to cancel the score that you don't want us to see. We will accept the GMAT, but that's in limited circumstances. So if you know for sure you're doing a dual degree, so if you're applying to business school as well at the same time as law school and you've already taken the GMAT, then we will go through a process of waiving the LSAT in lieu of your GMAT score. If you have any kind of issues with your testing, so say you did something online, computer crashes, you were sick, anything like that, just use an addendum and explain why, the score wasn't exactly what you were expecting it to be, or why you had to cancel a score, anything like that. And then we do have the upcoming LSAT administrations listed below. So keep that in mind in terms of the register by date. But yes, if you need to take it more than once, that is perfectly fine. Then we have your academic record. As I said, it is the transcript of any school that you attended after high school. So that can be community college classes, that can also be any study abroad classes that you took. All of those transcripts you need to send to LSAC, not the individual law schools, and LSAC will calculate a cumulative GPA from all of those transcripts for us to review. We will also get a copy of every transcript so we can see your graduating GPA as well. When we look at the transcripts, we're thinking about what's the rigor of your courses, the workload, grade trends, and then also how many pass, no pass grades you took. Then we get to your personal statement. So that is 2 to 4 pages, 11-point font, double spaced. Those are just our rules at Berkeley Law. Every law school may be different, so just make sure you follow the instructions for what they're asking for. Um, Also for us, we don't have a topic, so we don't give you a statement that you need to reply to. It is open-ended, so you get up to 4 pages to tell us anything that you wanted us to know. So that means it can be your perspective and your experiences, your interest in the legal profession, and also your interest in UC Berkeley Law. I'd say you don't have to use all 4 pages. You can use three. Some people only submit two. Standard is two, and I think that's what most people do is try to recycle their personal statement for as many schools as they can. But again, just make sure you're reading the instructions. If the topic changes, make sure you change the essay. And then we have optional and required addenda. So I mentioned before there's an academic potential addendum. So if you somehow have an issue where maybe spring of sophomore year, your grades slipped or something happened where you had to withdraw from school, anything like that, just use an addendum to explain to us whatever discrepancy that you see in your transcript because we'll likely see it as well. And tell us as much as possible, err on the side of transparency. And then we also have short answer questions. So for us at Berkeley Law, we have 2 questions that you can choose from. I think there are a total of 8 or 10. You get 1 page each. I would suggest doing the optional statements for every law school that you apply to, just because it's another opportunity for the admissions committee to get to know you. And then we have the character and fitness addendum. So if you answer yes to any of the questions in the application, and this is for all law schools, you need to write an addendum explaining what the circumstances of the issue was. So it can be anything from maybe you had a candle in your dorm room when you weren't supposed to if you got arrested for some reason. Again, err on the side of transparency and just let us know. This is the first step that you are taking in terms of getting your license. And so once you graduate law school, you'll have to go through a background check and they'll be checking all of these things anyway. So you want a history of just making sure that you're telling everything that's happened in your circumstances. We also have scholarship essays. The ones listed here are some of the bigger awards. So the first is the Opportunity Scholarship. That's 1 to 2 pages. That's for people who are first gen to college or first gen to law school. We also have the Public Interest Scholars. That is if you are dedicated to working in public interest after you graduate law school. Those two have separate deadlines, so you want to make sure that you get your applications and essays in because they are reviewed not only by the admissions committee, but by also a scholarship committee. And then we have the Hyundai Kia Scholarship. That is for people who are interested in IP and tech, specifically in the automotive industry. So again, make sure you read everything, look at the deadlines, plan it out for when you're going to apply. And then we also have your resume. So there is no page limit really for a resume, but standard even for jobs is 1 to 2 pages. You want to keep in mind that it's not a CV, but you can include your research and publications, and there shouldn't be anything from high school. So it's everything after high school that you're including. That's your work experience, any leadership opportunities, volunteer positions, internships, externships, things like that. Also, don't assume that we know acronyms. You want to make sure you spell everything out for us and also include the dates, the hours that you worked, and any duties that you had. Your resume is also a good opportunity for us to see if you did have to work while you were in school, what your kind of workload looked like in terms of your job, and then also your classes. So, again, tell us as much as possible about you. And this is an example of what the resume should look like. Every school might have slightly different rules that they're looking at, but this is pretty standard. You can also use Google or something to kind of figure out how to standardize your resume. But you want to make sure you're using bullet points. You want to make sure everything is evenly spaced, same font, all those kinds of things. And the same goes when you get to listing your extracurriculars. It's all going to be flowing together, so make sure everything is uniform. And then we have your letters of recommendation. So we will at Berkeley Law accept up to 4 letters of recommendation. General is 2 at minimum. So 2 of those do need to be academic letters, especially if you are coming out of undergrad. So say you're immediately graduating and you're starting law school, or it's within a 5-year period. Anything beyond that, we'll be looking more at recommendations from your current employers, direct supervisors, things like that. But if you want to submit 4, you are more than welcome to do that. The other 2 can come from anybody you volunteered with, if you worked with, anyone who can speak to your character, things like that. Just no family members or family friends, things, people like that. The academic sources should be professors, teaching assistants, graduate student instructors, thesis advisors, anyone who saw your work. And then we have also that earlier asking. So if you know that you want to ask a certain professor or TA or someone to write a letter for you, make sure you give them adequate time to write it. It is important that they tell you stories about, well, they tell us stories about you just because that means they kind of got to know you a little bit better as opposed to you being one of 100 students in a class and they only know that you passed the class. It's important for us to know that they kind of saw you, maybe worked not just with them, but with other students if you tutored, things like that. Also, keep in mind that your recommendations don't go to the individual schools, they also get sent to LSAC. We did get a question I'll answer right now. So, if you worked or interned during high school, do you want to include that on your resume? Probably not, unless you perhaps continued the job while you were in school, like while you got to college. So, I'd say we're not really looking at anything in high school. If you feel like it's very important to your story, like it somehow comes up in your personal statement or any other optional statement, you can include it, but we really are looking at what you've been doing in the past 4 years at minimum. So it's kind of up to you to make that decision, but I'd say it's not really relevant if it happened in high school. And then we also got another question. Are there any extracurriculars items on resumes that law schools especially like to see? Um, Not necessarily. So this kind of comes up to where people think they have to have something legal related on their resume. It's kind of hard to get those kind of positions while you're in college, unless you know someone or you somehow got involved with an organization early on. So it just depends, honestly. You don't need to have law related experience, but if you do have it and it makes sense for the story you're telling us about the type of law you want to do, why you're pursuing law school, perfectly fine, but don't feel like you just need to go out and do something immediately for 2 months just to add it to your resume. It's not necessary. When we look at your extracurriculars and things like that, we're looking for the commitment that you've made. So that's anything that's 6 months or longer. That's when we're going to really start to see, like, oh, you made an impact. Oh, maybe you grew within the organization, things like that. And then we have another question. If you're graduating early, should you include a year of high school? I'd say probably not, unless again, it is relevant to anything that you're saying about why you want to be in law school or how it'll show up in law school. So perhaps if it was something like you did mock trial, or you did some sort of negotiations competition, anything like that, I'd say you could still list it, but it's not, shouldn't be like the highlight of your resume. You can put it on there, but don't highlight it. All right. And so then we will continue. So now we'll talk about Berkeley Law. So this slide is a breakdown of our class profile. So last year, which is the year for the students who are currently on campus right now, we had 6,593 applications. Typically, we get about 7,000 applications each year. Our class size this year was bigger than typical. So typically, we have 350 students, but currently we have 374. With this upcoming cycle, we are looking to keep the number at 350. Something that has changed is our median GPA. So we go by medians, not averages. Currently, it is a 3.92. And for the LSAT, the median is a 170. Do not freak out if you don't hit those numbers exactly. You can still get in. It just means that you may need to carry a little extra weight in the other areas of your application. And even if you are lower on both, it's still not impossible for you to get in. Then we're really relying on your recommendations and also your writing samples. So kind of think of it that way, where you need to balance things out if something is sort of lacking, and then just make sure you tell us, what happened, why things were the way that they were. You can't really change your GPA once you graduate. You could take the LSAT again if you want, but it really depends on you and your circumstances. Now we'll look at the curriculum. So this is pretty standard at any law school that you go to for your first year. You're looking at civil procedure, contracts, criminal law, legal research and writing, torts, written and oral advocacy. And then at Berkeley Law, you get to take up to two electives in the spring. So it'll depend on the law school, what order you take your classes in. Some schools also make you take property your first year. It just depends. What you need to keep in mind, though, is that these first year classes are pretty relevant. They're foundational for law, and this is what you'll be tested on when you take the bar exam after you graduate. So everybody's taking these classes at Berkeley Law. We have that class size that's typically 350 students, but we break you all down into mods. And so there are about 30 students in each of those. Those are the people that you'll be taking your classes with and you'll be on campus with at the same time. So we kind of stagger the groups. So not everybody's in class for torts at the same time or for contracts. And then from that mod, you also get broken down into study groups if you want to partake in that. So we try to keep our student to faculty ratio pretty low. And then something that people sometimes don't know about Berkeley Law is that we don't do a traditional grading structure. So we don't do A through F letter grades. We do passing, honors, and high honors. So that means you don't get a GPA when you graduate. There is no class rank. It has not been an issue when it comes to employers. They know that Berkeley Law does not use a traditional grading system, and that's been the case for decades now. If you are perhaps considering doing like a judicial clerkship or something like that, that's when you may need a GPA. And so one can be calculated. You just have to request it from the school for those kind of positions because they are a bit more competitive. We also offer certificates and combined degrees. So the certificates we have listed are just areas of law that you may be interested in. To get the certificate along with your diploma when you graduate, you just need to take so many classes within that area and have, I believe, a B plus grade in those classes, and you'll get that certificate with the diploma. We also have the combined degrees. The most popular is the JD MBA, and then also the Masters of Public Policy. If you are not seeing something that you want to kind of also do a combined degree with that's listed here, if it's not here, we don't have it currently. So just keep that in mind. It's maybe the case that it gets added later, but it's not the case that it's here now. And so also, when it comes to doing a concurrent degree, Typically, that program is going to be at minimum 4 years. Some people will do a dual degree that is along with the medical school. We don't have a medical school at Berkeley, so you can't do a JD/MD, but some other schools may have that option for you. And then as far as your acceptance rate specific to areas of law, so we don't break it down based on the specific area. What we do look at in terms of you getting into the law school, they'll ask you what area you might be interested in, and then for advising purposes, and then also kind of making sure that the mods are evenly split, they'll break you down that way. So everybody might have like a similar interest in IP, or they might be interested in energy or something like that, but it doesn't impact your acceptance into the program. We are seeing more people who are interested in energy, though. I've seen that a lot in the applications last cycle. So I just think that might be a growing area. And then we have your facts about our pro bono program. So we are a public mission oriented school. So that means that we care about public service. So we offer summer public interest grants, public interest fellowships, bridge fellowships, and also loan repayment assistance. So many of our students do pro bono. It's pretty common. They like to be involved. It's not necessarily a requirement that you hit a certain number. It just so happens to be the case that most students hit the bare minimum anyway because they like participating in clinics and then also doing other research and volunteer positions. So the other opportunities that we have are the journals. The most popular one that you've likely heard of is the California Law Review. You do have to write on for that journal. So that means the summer after your first year, you'll be given a test about your blue booking skills. So it's a different means of citations that becomes important when you start to draft documents, and especially if you're going to clerk, things like that. So they're testing that skill set, and you can join the journal depending on if you pass, what your score is. The other journals you do not write on in the same way for California Law Review. These you may have to apply for, but they are just based on different areas of interest that the students have had. So they work with the professors and they sometimes do research, they help them with their publications, or they might get published themselves. We also have blast trips. So these are shorter, more intensive service projects that people do typically over a summer break or a fall break, winter break, spring break. You go in somewhere typically out of state and you work there for a weekend or a week, and then you come back and finish the project. It might be the case that the project gets picked up by one of our clinics currently on campus, or it may not. So it just depends, and those kind of will change up a little bit year to year. We also have student-led service projects. So these projects are driven by the students themselves. So if you have an idea about something that you want to work on, you propose it to the administration and they partner with you and whatever other organization or professor and try to make it a real project. Again, these can get picked up by the clinics for continuous work, or sometimes they happen as a one-off and then that's it. As far as our clinics go, so clinics you do for credit, so that means it's going to count towards your degree. Typically, they are a heavy load for students. So when you are a 1L in the spring, where I said you could take two electives, you can allocate that towards a clinic. It is uncommon for 1Ls to participate in clinics. So here at Berkeley Law, you can do that. But to keep in mind, at Berkeley Law, you do have to apply to all of the clinics. So that means that you may not get in for the semester that you want, but you are guaranteed to participate before you graduate. And these are the clinics that are pretty popular on campus, but we have more than just what's listed here. And I did see a question. Okay, so many admissions officers with rolling admissions recommend applying by November 1st. I used to hear by Thanksgiving, but from what I am hearing, they are saying earlier due to the high volume of applications and to have a better chance at scholarships and a spot in the class. What are you recommending? And did your class last year fill up earlier than your February deadline? So what is happening is that we are expecting an increase in applications. Typically, that happens anytime there's a change in political administrations and things like that. Also, with the layoffs that are happening, people tend to use that time to go back to school. So we are expecting to see higher than 7,000 applications. I would say yes, then you do need to be considering applying earlier. However, not everybody can apply earlier just based off of when you registered for an exam, if you have all of your application materials together. So if you are not applying this cycle, I would say when you start to plan, think about taking your test before September. So you want to be preparing anytime before that, so that way you have your test by the September 1st day that the application opens. And typically, what we see is that the people who apply in September, October, November, those are the stronger applicants. And then once we get to December and January, we do get the most influx of applications. So it just depends. It's not the case that you can't get in if you apply in January. It just means that you really need to have a strong application at that point and you need to stand out because we tend to see more average applications in that period. And then also just the volume that we have to work through. We aren't necessarily going to be able to give you a whole like 30 minutes of our time to review your application and make an argument for you. And it's not the case that we can necessarily do that early on either, but the benefit to applying early is that we are starting to build the class. So the people that we admit in September, they are kind of setting the standard for what we're also continuing to look for throughout the year. And then what LSAT score is usually considered good by the committee? Honestly, I'd say if you can get a 160, that's a strong score, but it also depends on what your GPA is. So again, it's that balancing act. Of course, everybody wants to try to aim for a 180, but I've seen people who have 180 and then they also have like a 3.9 GPA and they still don't get in because the quality of what they're telling us in their personal statement, their recommendations is not up to par. So it really depends. It's kind of it's really subjective. And it also depends on who the reviewer is, what standards the dean has set for the year in terms of what they're looking for. So we are seeing the increase in the median GPA and LSAT scores, but we still have people who have gotten in with a 156, but they had a lot, like their resume was really strong and what they state, like their stated purpose was, that's also really strong. So I'd say the higher the better, honestly. And then especially if you are looking for full tuition scholarships, GPA, LSAT's definitely going to matter for those, but the quality of the writing still makes a difference. So then we also have the East Bay Community Law Center. So this is another group here where we are in the East Bay that compromises a lot of different clinics that you can work with. So it just depends on what kind of clinic you want to work with. If you want to do clinic more than once while you're in law school, that is totally up to you. It really comes down to how you plan out your time while you're in school. And then we have another question. What are your thoughts on someone negotiating a financial package if they received a better option from another school? Yes, so that process is considered reconsideration, and that typically happens sometime in March for us at Berkeley Law. So if you, or it can happen earlier if you apply earlier and you get admitted, so you start to receive your award letters and everything from other schools. I'd say what you need to do is think of your reconsideration process as a one-time event. So you want to wait until you get your awards from the other schools that you feel like, will make a difference in terms of the competition for you being awarded more. So if you applied it and you got to like you applied to three schools or something and you only heard back from one at the time when you're asking us to reconsider your offer, that's not good if you're going to again reach out to us to ask for reconsideration twice. You only get one shot at reconsideration. And it's perfectly fine for you to do that, but honestly, just be, polite about how you ask. Send an email to us, send us a copy of the other letter, send us, a statement of why you are seeking this reconsideration, and then the process will go from there. We know every other school has deadlines, so you have to keep that in mind too, in terms of when you need to submit your statement of intent to register. So it really depends. And then also if you apply to some school's early decision. So you can do that, you can reconsider, but it only happens one time, and you kind of want to be um, careful in the way that you go about the process and how you ask. The other opportunities that we have on campus include working with the research institutes and centers. So as opposed to clinics, these are more of your volunteer opportunities. So you can do that. We also have field placement programs. So we have students who will go and work in DC for a semester. And then we also have student organizations. Some things that applicants sometimes are interested in is a study abroad option. We do have that, so you can do work at The Hague. You can also do another program where you do a judicial externship. So it depends on what you find, what's available, and what's out there. Sometimes, if there are study abroad programs that are happening in other schools that you want to be a part of, you can bring that up to the administration so they can somehow try to make it work so you can get credit for that program. But again, it depends on what's being offered year to year. We have lots of student organizations and we do still have advocacy competitions. So if you liked moot court, if you were on trial team or anything with negotiations, we have competitions and clubs for those. And then this slide is a breakdown of our employment report. So this is from 2023. If you go on the website, you'll likely see the one from 2024. But what matters here, you're looking at the bar pass rate for any law school that you go to. Berkeley's is typically around 90%. In 2023, it was 88%. We also measure employment at 9 months out. So that means after you graduate, who's employed 9 months after. Our rate is about 94% for that. And then we look at median salary and it's 215,000. That is because most of our students typically go into big law, but that is becoming a more competitive process, and I'll be talking about that a little bit too. So now we'll move on to tuition and financial aid. So this is the cost of attendance for this current year. For California residents and non-residents, it's about a $20,000 difference. That will likely be the case at most schools that you are considering applying to. In-state is always cheaper than out-of-state. However, it depends on what program you want to be in, what area you want to practice in, or if you just need to be in a certain place because of family things. All of those factor in. As far as living expenses goes, they have it set the same for both. I'd say the biggest component of your living expense in the Bay Area is going to be housing. That is another reason to apply early. The cheapest housing option that you'll likely get is on-campus housing, but it is not guaranteed. So that means you do need to get on the list as early as possible. Most of our law students do have roommates, and they do live on campus. So it depends, but you can lower your living expenses if you have roommates, depending on the neighborhood that you choose to live in, if you're driving, if you're biking, commuting, things like that. And then these are our award types. So we have a full list on the financial aid website. I'd say Google that and you can find it. But we have what are called Dean's Fellowships, Center Scholars Awards, and then we have the full tuition and fees scholarships that I mentioned. So that's Public Interest Scholars, Berkeley Law Opportunity Scholars, and we also have a Native American Opportunity Program. So if you are registered or affiliated with the tribe, you can apply for that scholarship. It's also an additional essay. We have the Binding Early Decision Program, which I talked about. We have the Military Promise Program. So if you are active or retired or on reserve status, then you can get a $10,000 a year scholarship for that, in addition to the benefits that you get from the military, the Hyundai Kia scholarship that I mentioned, and also continuing student scholarships. So if you don't get as many scholarships in your first year as you want, keep in mind that you can apply for more scholarships in your second and your third year. I'll also mention that we do have a transfer program. So sometimes people don't think about transferring between law schools, but after your first year, you can transfer to a different law school depending on your GPA, your grades, things like that. At Berkeley Law, our transfer students do get a certain minimum scholarship per year. So that's something that they're guaranteed. But again, it depends on your situation and your circumstances. And then we have named awards. So we started this last year. These awards are not scholarships that you can apply for separately. Instead, the admissions committee has to flag you for them. And that's based on what we see in your application. So if you are interested in litigation, if you have any experience with trial advocacy or just anything like that that is related to law, make sure you tell us everything about you so that way we can flag you for additional scholarships. This is going to matter so much now because there is not a graduate student plus loan anymore. So essentially you are going to be capped in terms of how much you can borrow from the federal government to cover the cost of going to school. And so it won't be enough, realistically. And so you'll have to consider, are you getting enough scholarships to cover how much it's going to cost to go? And then also, if you don't, what is your credit score? Are you going to need to apply for private student loans? Do you have any family that can help you? Do you have savings that you'll be able to rely on? It's a big change that we're seeing regarding financial aid. So definitely factor that in because it would be a terrible situation if you get into law school, and you're there for the fall semester, but then you don't have enough to continue for the spring semester, and then you have to withdraw. So a lot of planning and focus is now shifting towards the actual component of can you afford to come? And if you cannot afford to come, that is essentially going to be the situation that you just can't afford to go at this point. So keep those things in mind. And that's why the scholarships really matter. So do every scholarship essay that you see. And then again, consider the fact that there are scholarships out there from each school that are not posted on the website. So, yeah, I will go ahead and take any other questions that you all have. Um, yeah, and I can stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. But yeah, if you want to use the Q&A, if you want to put them in the chat, however you want to go, or if you want to speak and ask, I'm open to that too. Okay, so let's see. Will these slides be sent to us for private review? So you will get a copy of the recording, me going through the slides, so you'll be able to see it that way. It'll be an email follow-up after the meeting. You'll likely receive it, if not today, probably tomorrow. All right, so one of the questions in the Q&A, we have, how would you assess splitters such as an applicant with a below median GPA but an above median LSAT? And also, how are applicants who have applied before assessed? Do they focus on how much an applicant has improved? So for the first question, if you're a splitter, that kind of relates to what I was saying about needing to pull extra weight in the other areas of your application. It makes it a little bit more challenging on your side in terms of how you tell your story, how much information you give us, the reasons behind why, there's a split between the things that we're seeing. So you just really need to take time to kind of figure out how you want to tell your story in those situations. And then also, if you've applied before, what happens is that we can see that you are a reapplicant in your file. However, it depends on whether or not the person who's reading your file will actually go back and look at whether or not, like what you submitted in your last application, how long ago it was, things like that. So we typically rely on what's the initial application, but if there's anything that's flagged for us in the current application, then we will go back and look at the first one. So it kind of depends on the situation. But yeah, we do look for improvement and we are going to be able to see all of your LSAT scores or GRE scores. Your transcript is likely not changing, but you are welcome to submit an additional letter of recommendation, which we suggest that you do. And then I'll take the question from Nicholas.
Hi, Bria. I was just wondering, like what mistakes like strong applicants make that could weaken their application.
Mhm.
Um, could you provide any insight on stuff like that?
Yeah. So I'd say not doing the scholarship essays, using their personal statement as a resume breakdown. Don't do that. Please think of each written component as another opportunity to tell us about a different side of you that we wouldn't otherwise get to know. Um, what else? As far as timing goes with your test scores, so sometimes people are going to retest, but they don't let us know that they're going to do that. So then we've already reviewed their application without the new score. So if you know you're going to retest, make sure you do use an addendum and then also email us and let us know about the registration date so we can hold your application for the new test score. Submitting past the deadlines is never good. Um, yeah, it's really just like the planning side that I think people can mess up on in terms of being ready. It's okay if you, you know, think you're going to apply to law school in February and then like September comes around and you're still getting things together so you actually submit your application in January. If you can pull it off, you can pull it off, but I think the best applicants are the ones who have kind of started the planning process at least a year before they plan to apply.
Gotcha. So just show very, very strong intent that this is something that you really want to do.
Right. The reflection piece should be clear to us in terms of, again, the story that you're telling, how well things fit together. Do we feel like we know you even though we haven't met you in person? Like we're not sitting wondering, oh, I wonder why they included this or this piece feels off or anything like that. Like we don't really have any questions because you've kind of laid it all out for us. All right. And so then let's see, we have another question. Oh, we have multiple questions. Let's see. Okay. Does Berkeley Law offer mentorship opportunities that connect JD students with civil rights lawyers, labor attorneys, and movement lawyers? Yes, we do. So that all comes through the CDO, which is our Career Development Office. They work along with our alumni organization. It's called DAR, and they host different events for attorneys to come on campus. They'll do sometimes coffee chats, and so they'll have those set out and on campus for people to meet and mix. They have mixers in the evenings. There are lots of lunch chats that are happening. So it's a lot that you can do to get involved and to meet people who are currently working in the field. And they like working with people who are students. So if you have questions, you also get access to the alumni registry. So you can email people, reach out to them. You can make suggestions on who you like, firms you'd like to hear from. So things like that. And then how does Berkeley support students from non-traditional or activist backgrounds in transitioning into law school and the legal profession? Again, that's coming from programs like the CDO, but we also have our student support services team. So they are the ones who are helping people adjust to how do I study? How do I brief a case? How do I prepare for exams? They hold mock exams. They also hold office hours. You do get a counselor, and then you also get someone from the CDO who's going to work specifically with you in terms of what you've stated you're interested in the area that you want to go to. If you're looking for more like hands-on, in-depth kind of mentoring, I'd say your best bet is to apply for the Berkeley Law Opportunity Scholarship. That comes with a fellowship component. So they do dinners with professors and things like that. It is competitive to get into that program. It's about 15 people who get it each year, but that's really where you kind of get a smaller environment to get to know everybody and work that way. And then we have another question in the Q&A. In terms of creating a strong application, would a focused resume on law be more effective than a more diverse one? It depends. Honestly, it's based on what it like how does it fit with the rest of your application in terms of what you've said in your personal statement and honestly, again, if you don't have the law experience before you get to law school, that's okay because you don't have to have that to go to law school. So that's one of the special things about law school. If you have it, that's great. But again, it really does come down to how you're piecing all of these things together and what you tell us. And Emma, I will take your question.
Thank you so much for hosting this. I just wanted to ask with the personal statement, it said that the length that you would accept is 2 to 4 pages. I know that the standard personal statement is usually about 2 pages. So, with that, like extra, like allowance, would you say that you'd rather us keep it like short and sweet if we feel like we've said everything we already needed to say, or would you recommend adding like another section such as like a why Berkeley law with that extra space?
So it'll depend on you, but I would say if you feel like you've said everything you need to say in 2 pages, don't do more. Like you don't have to say more just to say more. We do look for that why Berkeley piece, but it tends to read better when it's mixed into the personal statement and not added as just a separate paragraph at the end. So if you can somehow work it in, you might need to rework the essay to make that happen. But yeah, you don't have to be 4 pages. If you want to do 4 pages, perfectly fine, but 2 is okay as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And then how much do low grades from community college affect your application GPA if your university GPA is significantly higher? It depends on how many of the grades are low and what the GPA is from community college. Again, LSAC is going to calculate a cumulative GPA, so they're going to factor in all of those plus the university GPA. So we don't get to control that. We only see the number that they produce for us. If there is a big difference between those numbers, then you can always use an addendum to explain, but we will be looking line by line at your transcript. So if something was happening in the first part of your college career, like talk about what was going on so we kind of have context as to why things are not similar or just like, consistent all the way through. And then let's go back to the chat. So, is there an acceptance rate for Berkeley Law specific to UCSD? Not that I know of. I think we get a lot of applications from UCSD, but I don't know that there's a specific acceptance rate. It just depends, honestly. So as far as what we're doing, we are looking at the number of applications we get from each school, but not how many people we're admitting from those schools. And then Matthew, your question?
Yeah, thank you for hosting us today. I have a question about the pass no pass section. So I'm looking at a study abroad program, for example, in Italy, where all my grades, all the classes that I'm taking for a whole year would only be pass no pass, because that's just how the program transfers back to UCSD. So do pass no pass classes have that much of a negative effect on my application?
So not in a situation like that. What we're really looking at is how many pass no pass classes you've taken within the program for your major. So if you have a like bunch of your classes that are for your major and you're graduating with that, and a bunch of them are pass no pass, that might be a flag. But otherwise, not necessarily. If it's study abroad and it's something additional or extra outside of the major, it's not, I don't think that should be an issue. But if you feel like you want to explain it, use an addendum. Always, whenever there's anything in your application, if you feel like there's a flag or a question, just go ahead and use an addendum. And then, can we include any international internships we may have done? Definitely. Anything that you did in college, if it's international, go ahead and include that. Sometimes people talk about that in their personal statements too. Is there an acceptance rate for Berkeley Law? Okay, I just answered that one. Can we include international? Yep, just answered that one. All right, Nicholas, go ahead. What's your question?
Um, Also, I was just wondering, do you feel like UC Berkeley has any specific or unique values that you feel like make, Berkeley's law schools more special than other law schools?
Yeah, so I'd say we are a smaller community. Some law schools have a bigger class size than we do, and we try to keep it small. We care about how invested our students are on campus. So we like to see people, especially in their resumes and what they talk about in their application, who like to be involved. We care about who you are as a person. The Bay Area tends to be a bit more of an open space. So we have people with different identities and things like that. So we are looking for people who are open-minded, even if you are, say, more conservative or something like that. Again, it's the open-mindedness and the respectfulness. That's something that we care about. Beyond that, really, it's just, what are you passionate about? I think in your application, we should be able to see that you care about things, you like to support people, and that's how you would contribute to our campus. Like we care about that side of you. We essentially think the expectation is that, of course, you're smart, so your LSAT GPA, that matters, but who are you at the core and what do you plan to do with your life in terms of law and things like that? And then let's see. All right, so What are some opportunities as an undergraduate student that can stand out in their application for UC Berkeley Law? If you happen to somehow get a law internship, externship, anything like that, work somewhere over a summer, even if you are just like a secretary or something at a firm, getting that kind of exposure to what's happening in a courthouse or what's happening at a law firm in an office, that helps, because that's really what you're going to be deciding on what environment you want to work in. So knowing whether you want to be doing litigation or if you want to be transactional, figuring that out, getting some experience that way will be useful. And then Danya, is that how you say?
Yes. Thank you so much for everything you've told us today. I really gained so much from it. I know that UC Berkeley has a public interest scholarship. So I was wondering from your perspective how competitive the scholarship is and what qualities or experiences um make an applicant stand out for it.
Definitely. So it's pretty competitive. Any of the full tuition ones are going to be competitive. So for the Opportunity Scholarship, I think it's about 10 to 15 people who get that each year. And then with the Public Interest Scholarship, it's less than that. So I think 8 people got it this year. I think it typically maxes out at about 10. So you are going to be reviewed for general admission, and then you are also reviewed for those specific scholarships. They are more competitive. They just because it's full tuition, but also there are fellowship components to that. As far as standing out, you definitely want to do the essays for that. So really explain what your plans are, your goals, why this is something that you're trying to do. And then for public interest, what I think they are probably looking more at is your resume in terms of how committed you've been to other public interest organizations or clubs or just things like that. So again, the story you tell, but then also your resume, how is that documented?
Thank you so much.
Mhm. And then we have, if we write the Why Berkeley optional essay, should we also write Why Berkeley in our personal statement? No. Don't repeat any information. Make sure that anytime you're writing something, it's different. Just because, again, we get to learn about you in a new way. All right, so what if there is an applicant with a lower GPA but a higher LSAT score with work experience after college? With the understanding of excellent essays and resumes, where would they stand with admissions? And then where would they stand for fellowships and scholarships? Honestly, it depends. Depends on the application cycle. Again, you can't change your GPA, so we're going to be looking more in that situation at what you've been doing for work. What kind of work are you doing, and how does it relate to what you did in undergrad? You can also definitely do the academic potential addendum. Um, yeah, so sometimes people will major in things like medicine, so they thought they were going to go to med school, but then that kind of lowers their GPA, but that's what they graduate with, and they're not doing that anymore. They can't change what they did before, so if that's a situation that's kind of similar, keep that in mind in terms of how you tell your story and why you're kind of making that pivot. What was the reflection process that you went through that made you change? And then also, what have you been doing with work? What skill sets do you need for your current job and things like that. As far as scholarships and fellowships, again, you can still definitely apply to the scholarships and fellowships. Apply for anything that you qualify for. So if you kind of fit the criteria for it, submit the additional essay for it. I think that's the best approach. What should and shouldn't be included in a personal statement? What kind of topics might be considered inappropriate or come across as oversharing? That is really up to you. I'd say definitely don't do the resume breakdown. That is unnecessary because we already have the resume. Don't just write about someone who's inspirational to you without bringing it back to yourself. And then also, if you are telling us a story about something that was traumatic that led you to want to pursue something in law, really be careful in the language that you're using and also just use tact in terms of how you're telling the story. Make sure you have multiple people read it so that way you can get a sense of what someone else's reaction is to reading the story. If people are walking away crying, if people are walking away angry, if people are confused, you want to make note of all of those things because the admissions committee, we are just people, and so we will have a response. So it's better for you if you kind of know what that elicits, like the response that your essay elicits, before you submit it to people that you don't know who's going to read it. Right. What are some things we should avoid writing within our addendums if we want to explain any lacking characteristics within our application? Um, I mean, I think you are using the addendum for that specific purpose to address anything that you feel like is lacking. So you don't want to just say, oh, I withdrew from school in the spring semester, and it's literally one line. That's not necessarily enough for us to understand what was happening in the context of your situation. You don't have to tell us in detail everything that was going on, but I think the piece that matters the most is what impact it had on your performance and how you reflected and improved from there. So it's always about like how you kind of jump back. Any kind of pivot, you improved onward and upward. That's your thinking in terms of how you're explaining anything to us in your application. And then I see another question. If we write the Why Berkeley optional essay, should we also write Why Berkeley in our personal statement? No, don't repeat information. So pick one place where you're going to address that. I'd say definitely maybe use it for the optional essay so that way you can tell us something different in the personal statement. But if you want to include both, just make sure it flows well together so it doesn't feel disjointed when we're reading and it's kind of like you just threw an extra paragraph in. Yeah, I think I got through the questions that were there. Any last questions from anybody? All right. Well, you all are very welcome. If you have questions, definitely feel free to email us. We are doing office hours virtually, so that's on Zoom. Feel free to drop in. That's happening throughout the fall. We also have a bunch of other virtual engagement opportunities with our student organizations that's also posted on our website. So if you just Google Berkeley Law Virtual Engagement, plenty of opportunities for you to see what else is happening here on our campus. But yeah, very glad to see you all. And yeah, thank you for the questions. I got through most of that. So very happy. And again, thank you, Marcy, for putting this together for us. I will make sure to send out the recording and everything to everyone so you have that.
Thanks so much, Bria. Appreciate you coming today.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.